Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's Dina Calmetta here. And for today's news, I do have quite a few headlines to share with you. And I first would like to talk about President Trump. He's made some big decisions in the last 24 hours. And so I first would like to go to this Fox News report in regards to him now changing course and supporting Ukraine and giving President Putin a 50-day warning. Let's get into this report. President Trump on Monday confirmed that the U.S. has agreed to sell arms to NATO, just moments after he said that Russian President Putin had just 50 days to secure a peace deal with Ukraine or face 100% tariffs. The NATO Secretary General said that Trump called him on Thursday to confirm that he wanted to enter into a deal with NATO allies to sell them arms for aid to Ukraine. The president said billions of dollars worth of U.S. arms would be purchased from allies like Germany, Finland, and Denmark that will be quickly distributed to Ukraine. The NATO secretary said that this is really big and stated that the decision was built on tremendous success of last month's NATO summit, when nearly every nation in the alliance agreed to increase their defense spending to reach 5% of the nation's GDP. But he confirmed that this is just the first wave. There will be more, so what we will do is work through the NATO system to make sure that we know what the Ukrainians need. He also said that he had met with the U.S. Secretary of Defense to ensure that the U.S. maintains what it needs for its stockpiles, but also works with NATO allies to fulfill orders for Ukraine's needs. President Trump said he was very unhappy with Moscow and expressed his frustration over what he thought should have been a done deal at least 2 months ago. Both leaders said that they thought they had secured an agreement with Putin on 4 different occasions. But then bombs would be thrown out at night and you'd say, we're not making any deals. The president said, I speak to him a lot about getting this thing done, and I always hang up saying, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched at some other city. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything. Apparently, what we're sending to Ukraine right now is Patriot rockets, which acts as America's primary air defense system, that were successfully used in the Middle East to shoot down missiles that Iran fired at a U.S. base in Qatar. But the military package for Ukraine will also include long-range missiles that could reach targets deep inside Russian territory. One British Army commander said that the shipment of these long-range missiles would have a profound psychological and physical effects on Ukraine. He said these weapons can strike Moscow over 400 miles from the border. That allows the Ukrainians to strike drone factory production and ammunition sites and others. So this will have both psychological as well as physical effects. People in Moscow, he said, will realize that they potentially could be targeted. The former army chief said that these weapons will put real pressure on Russia, stating that the metric has now changed and Trump's decision could make a huge difference. Now, with that said, Putin's chief propagandist has warned that Russia could wipe out both coasts of the U.S. with its torpedo weapons. He said that launching the nuclear-powered drones designed to unleash a radioactive tsunami would mean the end for America. Speaking on the state-run Russia One channel about a hypothetical response to Western aggression, he said, will Trump understand that 2 Poseidons launched from different sides could wipe out the U.S. and create a radioactive disaster? That would be the end. Nothing will save them, he said. Referring to U.S. missile systems, he said no protective element will help them. He also suggested that Washington underestimates Russia's capabilities, adding it would face dire consequences if it escalates tensions. So again, more fighting words coming out of Russia. Now here's a very interesting post from MSN, originally from the Washington Post. But the report goes on to say that faced with intensifying Chinese encroachment at sea, the Philippines increasingly sees its national security as intertwined with that of Taiwan, and is quietly ramping up formal and informal engagement with the island. This marks a significant departure from Manila's conservative approach towards Taiwan and could pave the way for the Philippines, a U.S. treaty ally, to play a bigger role if China makes good on its threats to invade Taiwan. Philippines Defense Secretary stated that any forced projection of China within our area is a matter of extreme concern, while Manila still observes the one China policy stipulating that there is only one Chinese government. The fates of the Philippines and Taiwan are increasingly enmeshed. He went on to say that it would be hiding from the obvious to say that Taiwan's security will not affect us. Now, China and the Philippines have clashed with rising intensity in the South China Sea, and the number of Chinese vessels in waters off the western coast of the Philippines has increased in the past last year, along with cybersecurity attacks, espionage, and other threats from Beijing, according to Philippines National Security Council. So very interesting. The Philippines, according to this report, is now working with Taiwan, so they must see this threat from China as serious and valid. And with that said, it's also been reported that Taiwan has launched their biggest ever war drills. And they do this, I want to say, every year, but they're getting bigger and bigger every year, anticipating China's ultimate move to take over the island. Michael Schneider with the most important news is reporting that this is not normal. We just had 4 one-in-a-thousand-year storms in just 1 week. He asks the question, what is it going to take for people to finally wake up? I'm old enough to remember when 1-in-1,000-year storms were actually rare. But these days, we are constantly being hit by them. In fact, here in the US, we just witnessed 4 in a single week. This isn't normal. In fact, this is not even close to being normal. We just keep getting pummeled by major disaster after major disaster. And yet most people act as if all of this is just temporary and weather patterns will eventually become stable again. He goes on to say that I have never heard of 4 1-in-1,000-year storms occurring during just 1 single week. But according to NBC News, that is precisely what just happened. First, a river rose in Texas. Then the rains fell hard over North Carolina, New Mexico, and Illinois. So in less than a week, there were at least 4 1-in-1,000-year rainfall events across the U.S. And intense deluges are thought to have roughly a 0.1% chance of happening in any given year. So we talked a lot about Texas, and thoughts and prayers again go out to all of those affected by this horrific tragedy. But Texas, as I mentioned earlier, was not the only state to experience dangerous flooding. North Carolina, New Mexico, and Illinois also got hammered. So what can we say? Well, one historic flood can be dismissed as just a coincidence. But 4 historic floods in a single week? In addition to the floods, the town of Sutton, Vermont just got hit by major flooding on July 10th for the 3rd consecutive year. What are the odds? If your town keeps getting hit by biblical flooding on the exact same day, year after year, perhaps it's time to consider relocating. While all of this flooding has been going on, volcanoes have been rumbling in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii. Volcanoes can be unpredictable, and there's always a chance that something bad will happen. But these recent seismic events along the Pacific Ring of Fire from Alaska to Washington to offshore Oregon are probably not directly related to each other. According to a seismologist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Earthquake Science Center in Seattle, she says this is what volcanoes do. They come to life for a while. Sometimes the earthquake activity leads to an eruption, and sometimes it doesn't. Of course, we are also watching for the big one in Southern California. And a giant swarm of earthquakes near the Salton Sea late last week is getting quite a bit of attention. The most powerful earthquake swarm struck on Friday and was measured at 4.3 in magnitude. Since then, over 30 smaller quakes have struck the same area along the lake's southern tip. The Ring of Fire seems to be waking up. So on top of all of that, 2 very large fires just erupted near Arizona's Grand Canyon National Park, and one of them is releasing chlorine gas into the air because a water treatment plant burned down. The White Sage Fires, what they're calling it, which started on July 9th, has already scorched more than 20,000 acres of land and has not yet been contained, according to authorities. Meanwhile, the Dragon Bravo fire, which exploded on July 4th, is also not contained, as it continues to threaten historical structures in the area and animals. So far this year, the number of wildfires in the U.S. has more than doubled compared to last year. You would think that the media would want to give that more attention. Of course, so many crazy things are happening that it really is very difficult to keep up with all of them. But here is yet another headline. It is being reported that an absolutely massive coronal hole has developed on the sun. Ben Davidson of Space Weather News issued a warning on X about an Earth-facing coronal hole that could eject fast-moving solar wind towards Earth, potentially triggering elevated geomagnetic activity, including auroras and geomagnetic storms. The high-speed stream is expected to reach Earth within days. So hopefully this does not turn into a serious threat, but there could be no denying that our planet is becoming increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, in Florida, the Daily Mail is reporting that 3 people were injured after being struck by lightning on a Florida beach. The terrifying incident occurred at St. Augustine Pier, a popular spot for vacationers and locals alike. A sudden storm rolled in, and bolts of lightning lit up the sky on beachgoers. 2 of the victims were rushed to the hospital, with one reportedly in critical condition. So let's go back to the earthquakes and talk about the sleeping giant fault that threatens to snap without warning beneath 300,000 Americans. A new U.S. geological survey showed that the Concord Fault, a geological fault in the San Francisco Bay Area, is active and moving due to ongoing tectonic motion between the Pacific and North American plates. A section of the fault, known as the Madigan Avenue Strand, stretches 12.4 miles throughout Walnut Creek in Concord from Northgate Road near Mount Diablo to Suisun Bay, which homes more than 300,000 people. According to the study, if the Concord Fault ruptures, it could produce an earthquake of at least a 6.7 or higher based on its length. Seismologists now believe that the fault lies about 1,300 feet west of where it was previously mapped, making homes and an elementary school directly in harm's way. Experts warn that the entire East Bay could be at risk, especially because the fault is now proven to be creeping into urban areas with no buffer zone or open space. Over the past 60 years, some concrete curbs have quietly shifted sideways without any shaking or sound, revealing hidden ground movement in the middle of a densely populated area. Researchers also found that it is shifting at a steady rate of about 3 millimeters per year. The pace matches what has been recorded along the fault's northern section. To confirm the movement, USGS scientists reviewed over 30 spots where curbs, sidewalks, and roads showed visible cracks or misalignments. In the meantime, a very strong 6.2 earthquake slammed into Panama on Monday, July 14th. The depth of the quake could not be determined, but it is assumed to be shallow. The quake was felt by many near the epicenter. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting that a 6.7 earthquake struck Indonesia's Tanah Island regions, with tremors felt in several small towns in eastern Indonesia. And speaking of lightning, USA Today is reporting that 2 teens went on a fishing trip, and unfortunately, they perished due to being struck by lightning. A lot of reports lately about people being struck by lightning. Now, over in Spain, a stationary storm system caused severe flooding on July 11th after dropping 3.9 inches of rainfall within 1 hour, prompting a red alert. The Watchers is also reporting that a powerful phreatic eruption occurred at the Santa Teresa, also part of the Los Angeles geothermal field in El Salvador, on July 10th. The eruption ejected a column of boiling water, steam, and sediment, blocking an access road and damaging surrounding infrastructure, but no injuries were reported. What do we say about today's reports? Well, we can definitely say that we're hearing of wars and rumors of wars, nation rising up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We are absolutely living in the days of Noah. Luke 21:25, and there shall be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. We've got that big coronal ejection. And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. We go back to Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 8. We see earthquakes in diverse places, and we're seeing a lot of earthquakes. And we go into the book of Joel and Acts, we're seeing some activity with volcanoes and fires. So we are absolutely watching the pages of the Bible come to life right before our very eyes. So certainly we are living in biblical times. And I'd love to hear from all of you. So please do leave your comments below this video. And thank you everybody for watching. God bless. And until next time, stay safe.